to Trust Me, You Can Relate. I'm Lisa Johnson Smith, and my guest today is someone who survived what many could not have. Imagine being an outstanding student and a model citizen, and while attending Yale Divinity School, working toward his second master's degree, he was arrested in class, handcuffed and shackled, and thrown into jail on charges of sexual assault, a crime that he did not commit. And that is just the beginning of the harrowing story of my guest today, Dr. Herron Gaston. He writes about this horrific experience in his book, The Darkest Night, an incarceration memoir from jail to Yale. And today he is an educator, he is an activist and author of a few books, and a pastor, and the first African-American at Yale in its history to hold the title of Associate Director of Admissions. Dr. Gaston is now holds 7 degrees, but his journey to get there was one that changed his entire life. Dr. Gaston, thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for having me.
Yes, well, let's get right into it. In your memoir, you recount in detail what happened that day in 2010 and your time in jail. Is that still hard for you to talk about?
So over the years, I've gotten better, at being able to talk about that with more ease. But I can definitely tell you, it's always the raw emotional material that sort of surfaces back whenever I talk about it. But it's a liberating experience now that I'm on the other side of that. But you can only imagine, how it feels when you're actually in the thick of it. And you think that you're probably not going to be able to come out of it because it's so tumultuous and so challenging and so emotive. But I'm so glad to be where I am now in terms of, that being in the rearview mirror.
Well, can you take us back to that day? What happened?
Yeah, so formerly I'd worked at the University of South Florida as a camp counselor. Prior to that, I was Mr. Upward Bound for the Upward Bound program through the University of South Florida as a high school student, and remained very actively involved with the TRIO program and Upward Bound when I was a student at Florida A&M University, and was recognized at the governor's mansion for being a top student of Upward Bound. And that particular summer, I'd come in contact with some of the members that worked at the University of South Florida that asked me, would I consider coming to work at USF prior to my matriculation at Yale that summer, just to kind of give me some money in my pocket, but also to be a mentor to students in the program. Mm-hmm. And so I obliged. Fast forward to August, I'm now at Yale Divinity School in New Haven as a new student, fresh from Florida, had never really lived outside of the state of Florida until that time. And so I was enrolled at Yale and was doing well, academically. And then I got a call one evening around, I think it was October the 30th, 2010. One evening, I got a call from the University of South Florida Police Department. And essentially the officer said, I'm calling to be in contact with Herron Gaston. I said, this is he. He said, well, a student in the program accused you of sexual misconduct. Do you know who I'm talking about? I said, I categorically deny the allegations. I don't know who you're talking about. This must be a prank call. So I hung the phone up and then the phone rang again for the second time. And I picked the phone up and the officer identified who he was and said, this is not a joke. This is the University of South Florida Police Department. Mr. Gaston, we're calling to let you know that, you have been accused of sexual misconduct. And again, I said, I categorically deny the allegations. I would ask that you would please speak with the family attorney. And at that time, I gave them attorney Daryl Parks, who was an associate at the law office of Ben Crump, who is the nationally renowned attorney that we hear about now in Tallahassee. And so from there, the officer was supposed to be in touch with the law firm to let them know sort of the next steps. And Attorney Parks called me back and said, I spoke with the University of South Florida Police Department. They essentially told me that this is no longer an active investigation, that they just wanted to inform you of it, of the allegations, and that, you should return back to school, as normal. So that's what I did. I went to class, the next couple of days or so. And then on November the 4th, 2010, the United States Marshals came inside of the classroom and arrested me in front of my peers. I was shackled from my hands. I was also shackled from my feet. They took me over to the Dean of Students office. Students were transitioning in between classes at that time, and so a lot of folks saw me walking on the quadrangle to the unmarked car that was actually parked outside of the Divinity School, and they put me in the vehicle. But it was a devastating experience, and something that I never saw happening in my entire life.
Did you say anything when they came into the class and called your name? And were you able to speak? Were you speechless? What did you do?
No, I mean, I was crying, profusely, as you can imagine. My entire world was turning topsy-turvy, right in front of me. And, the only thing that I can think was, oh my God, I've worked so hard to get here to Yale. I'm one of 6 Black students here. And automatically, because of my ethnicity and my background and my race, I felt that I was representing all Black folks. And it's just so stereotypical that this would be happening to me in real time. I felt very pressed in on. And at that moment, I was speechless because I was living a nightmare, essentially.
And how old were you at the time?
So I was just off the heels of 22. So I believe I was right at 23 when that happened.
Okay, so one of the things that got to me in the book that I was not completely surprised about, but still shocked, is how you talk about how prisoners, or once people, even innocent people, are taken into custody, they are really objectified. From the moment you got into that squad car to the moment you were taken into jail, I mean, everything was about sexuality and I just, all those things, they were just so disturbing to me. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, obviously it's pervasive.
Absolutely. All too often I've experienced the ease with which young Black men, look like me, fall in the crushing yoke of injustice by just inherently and systemic racist institution called our criminal justice system. In fact, it's a criminal injustice system that we are trying to get to the place to where we actually have equal justice under the law for all people, including folks that look like me. But from the first time that I got inside of the car, the officer was hurling insults. He said, I knew that we were coming here to pick up a Black guy. Why did you do that? So there was already an indictment. There was already a tool of guilt that he had already projected onto me because of my skin color. And the fact that he had to come to Yale to pick me up was kind of like, you didn't deserve to be there anyway. And so we're just basically taking you away from there to show you that you're not, this Marvel good citizen, that you are, a criminal. And I was puzzled about the fact that a law enforcement agent who was tasked with making the arrest and just basically taking me where I needed to be was saying these kinds of things. So I think that that's demonstrative of how, African Americans particularly are seen and viewed as it relates to our criminal justice system. And, someone said it best: when you look at our criminal justice system, you see just us. And it doesn't mean that African American people have more proclivity to crime. It's just that the over surveillance and the policing in our communities and the way in which we are hunted down, is the reason that we make up a disproportionate number of inmates behind the what I call invisible institution, because once you're there, society tends to forget about you. And so we have a duty, a moral obligation to really speak to systemic racism and institutional racism and how it works and how it feeds into the criminal justice system and criminalize persons like me, which makes it easy to objectify someone like me and for people to say, oh, this is just what Black people do. But in fact, that was the farthest thing from the truth. It was a miscarriage of justice from the way in which the investigation happened. I should have never been arrested at all. And it has had collateral consequences in terms of my being able to push through and move forward. And there's always this digital footprint that is out there that haunts you almost for the rest of your life, and you have to talk about this at every level. Folks want to know, well, what happened, and I have to explain it over and over and over and over and over again. So I'm happy to be at a place where I can do that therapeutically.
Was the book kind of cathartic for you?
It was because it allowed me to share my own narrative. Because in the age of the internet and social media, folks can create whatever narrative they want to create, devoid the facts. And so I wanted to be able to tell my story authentically from my lens and the way in which it happened and the way that it impacted me, to give people an opportunity to really hear the facts and to hear the real truth of what happened.
Once you got inside and you realized, okay, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, what was going through your mind?
So my parents didn't know anything about this. I was really concerned about my mom. I was also concerned about my father.
So you weren't given that phone call?
So I wasn't given the phone call to be able to contact them. My parents didn't know what was going on. In fact, they learned that I was arrested because they had Googled me, because they hadn't heard from me probably in a day or two, and they know it was unlike me when they kept calling my cell phone. And the school also was very much slow in terms of reaching out to the next of kin to let them know what was happening. And so my mom, literally almost went into cardiac arrest when she Googled and noticed that, I was in jail, and it was plastered all over the media and all of that stuff. And she had no clue what was going on. And I recall being in the jail cell, and, one of the bailiffs were coming around, and I said, well, what's my bond? And she says, well, right now you don't have a bond. Maybe you'll have a bond in a couple of hours. So a couple of hours went by, which now puts me into the late evening of November 10th, 2010. And then, a bail bonds person is walking around, and I said, well, how much is my bail? And she says, your bail is $1 million. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I being charged with? And they said to me, we don't know what your charges are at the moment, but I'll come back and I'll let you know what the charges are. So the woman came back and she says, well, whatever the charges are, it's up there almost with like murder. So it has to be something synonymous to that, or rape. So she came back and said, you're charged with 4 counts of sexual battery, custodial authority. Each of those charges, could land you 30 years in the Florida State Prison for each charge. So you could be facing 120 years. Your bond is at it's $1 million. So, of course, I told them that I would like to make a call home to my parents, and I called and I spoke with my mom, and she was like so shaken. Her voice was cracking. I was very much concerned about her and her health condition and stuff like that, because she has trachycardia, which is her heart beats too fast. And my mom had already lost a kid before into a tragic death. And so this was something that was incredibly tragic. And I'm my mom's, I would dare to say, favorite kid. So she was very much concerned, and she was hurt. And I told her to hold on, do some research, try to find me an attorney. I'm innocent. And I can promise her that, I'm going to get on the other side of this. And so my mom worked with this guy that I had formerly worked for at Public Affairs Consultants. His name is Jack Corey. She was able to get in contact with him, and he told her, I want to get Herron from New Haven. I know that it's a very racist place, and the way that he's being treated there, I know that it's not going to be well, and he deserves, to be out of jail. So he helped to give my parents most of the bond money to bond me out once I was eventually extradited back down to Florida.
What did they do to get the rest of the bond money?
And then my parents had to put their house up. They had to borrow a lot of money. My mom, went to a private bank. She borrowed as much money as she could. Other people in the neighborhood who believed in me, they sold cookies, they did bake sales. Churches, raised collections and money to give to my family to try to helped me to fight this case and to get, the best competent legal representation, so that I can get on the other side of it.
So this bond was over what period of time did it take?
So it literally took, several months for them to come up with the money, to get me out the 10%.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You were not read your rights.
No.
You were not given a phone call.
No.
You were not given an attorney.
No.
Or allowed to get your own attorney.
Not until I got to Florida. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, offense after offense after offense.
Absolutely.
Okay. We'll get back to that. Once you were inside, okay, you spent some time in New Haven. How much time were you there?
So I was in New Haven for about 90 days, because Florida has roughly 90 days before they have to come and get you. And I believe Florida came to get me somewhere around the 89th day.
So what were your days like?
So I was locked down for 23 and a half hours a day, with 30 minutes to be able to, go to the restroom, take a shower, and then maybe, some level of recreational activity for about 10, 15 minutes. But for the most part, 23 and a half hours a day. I recall being in a cell with roughly 6 guys. And it was absolutely terrifying, because they were in there for various crimes, but mostly, pretty heinous crimes while they were being held. And, this was certainly new for me, because I'd never, been incarcerated, and never spent any time, in a jail cell, but I felt very claustrophobic. At one point, I was, I heard where they were planning to attack me in a very sexual way. And I went to the door and started beating the door down, trying to get the attention of the guards. And one of the guards came to the window and basically peeked in and looked at me and said, what the hell do you want? And I said, I got to talk to you about something private. He's like, no, don't bring your ass to jail. What do you want? And so he cracked open the door, and I told him, I said, I feel unsafe. And essentially he just, slammed the door back and was like, go back inside. And then the guys, understood that I was trying to like snitch. Mm-hmm. So, I was punished, by them when I got back, in the cell and into my bunk. They started cursing at me, saying all kind of stuff to me about, you're going to be my bitch, don't come to jail, don't try to tell, because they're only going to put you back in here with us. And it was just frightening. I couldn't really sleep. I mean, I had to really, squeeze my buttocks against the wall, in order for me to feel, somewhat of a comfort. And just the stares that I got, and the kind of, sexual overtones and undertones during the conversations that were being had. I mean, I was just frightened out of my mind. Here it is. I'm a Yale student, well decorated, never been to jail at all. I haven't had that as an experience. And then now being faced with reality of what could happen to me behind bars and while I'm in custody, and not feeling safe.
I can't even imagine. I remember in your book, you talked about how at some point, I'm not sure if it was in New Haven or in Florida, but you considered suicide at some point. And I couldn't help but think about Khalif Browder, and then all the other men that I'm sure are dealing with this same plight. Mm-hmm. Talk about where you were at that point.
I was at a very, very low point. I lost probably about 40 to 50 pounds, probably even more.
Over what period of time?
Over just a brief period, over about the 9-month stint. I mean, I lost a lot of weight, but definitely when I got arrested, I'll probably say within a week or two, I was already down about 15, 20 pounds. And then, I just continued to lose weight. And, I decided that, I didn't want to live like that. Mm. And, I was so much going through my mind. People were sending me texts. Why did you do that? That was a stupid move. I had someone say, maybe the world is better without you.
Wait, you said, excuse me, I'm sending you texts. You had a phone?
So I'm talking about when I got out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Eventually, okay. No. Eventually, when I got out, I was receiving these kind of messages and stuff. And so that's when I contemplated that. It was
Oh,
very serious for me, and I
yeah.
was just embarrassed. I was humiliated. I was shamed, not just for myself, but I was also ashamed, because my parents are pretty well-respected people in the community. My family's respected, and just the nature of the crime to which I
Mm,
was being accused of was just something I couldn't fathom. And I
mm,
thought the world might be better, without me in it. And I
mm.
believed the words that those folks that were mean-spirited had said to me at that time. I was at my lowest moment. I hit rock bottom.
Whew. Um, Despite that, what I found remarkable was the fact that, you know, it's just amazing how God protects us wherever we are, and He's always with
Mhm.
us. And He always finds a way to make good out of bad. And you actually ended up being a prayer warrior in jail for other inmates.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about how that came about.
Yeah, so I couldn't help but to think, about what my grandmother used to always say. I mean, I grew up in church. We went to church in the morning. We didn't get church, from church until late at night. And my grandmother used to always say, prayer changes things. And then she would always say that the effectual, fervent prayer of the righteous availeth much. And she said that, when you're doing good, evil is always present, and
Mm,
that the mission statement of the enemy is to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And so all of those things that she would say to me, and that God sometimes takes his toughest and strongest soldiers through mighty battles, but yet they will come out, on the other side.
mm,
All of that stuff began to minister to me. So while I was in there, I tried not to look at the situation as it was, but to see how I could use this as a moment of ministry to
mm,
help minister to somebody else. And I deeply believe in the scripture where it says that in the latter days I'll pour my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions.
mm,
I thought about Paul and Silas, in the Bible that were arrested and in jail, and just began to continue to pray. And something happened at daybreak, where they
mm,
came out on the other side, and they were praying and they were singing hymns. And I just kept singing hymns and kept praying, and turned the jailhouse into a praise house, because I believe that God can do anything but fail. And so I believe that if God could do it for them, then God could also do it for me. And that God is not a man that shall not lie, nor should his word turn void. And if he says it, it shall come to pass. And I just believe that with every fiber of
man.
my being. And it was my faith that sustained me.
Mm, what a testimony. So how did you start out? Who was the first person that you prayed for, and how did that happen?
So the first person I prayed for, I believe his name was Sean, in New Haven. He was in the same cell as me. And I think he was being held for attempted murder. And he, kept saying that he didn't do it. He didn't do it. And
Mhm,
I asked him, do he believe in prayer? And
mhm,
he says, not really, but, he's open, to me praying for him. And then I shared with him that, I was a student at the divinity school at Yale, and I was studying, theology. So I began praying for him and praying for him. And, I laid hands on his head and I said, if you believe that you didn't do it and you didn't do it, God is a vindicator and he can bring you out.
Amen.
And I recall, he became a pretty good friend of mine while we were in there. We were spend some time out on the recreational field playing basketball. And he served kind of as a protector, kind of letting me know about jailhouse culture, since that wasn't his first rodeo. But eventually, like a couple of days later, he was removed out of the cell, and someone had bonded him out. And he was unaware of who this person was going to bond him out, because everybody he had called told him they didn't have the money. And God made a way somehow. So I knew that if God could do it for him, that God will eventually do it for me. And I just kept praying for everybody else that was in the cell. And they all got bonded out, or they were removed, placed somewhere else. And I was the last person standing, in that cell. And I said, it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. And, I know that if you've done it for these individuals, I know that you're going to do it for me. And I just kept praying and kept my mind stayed on God. And that's what sustained me during that period.
So do you think that you got kind of a reputation as the guy we need to see now? Were people knocking on your cell like, hey, can you pray for me? Can you pray for me?
Well, when I got to general population, eventually they had heard about it. I mean, it's so interesting in jail, how folks are able to communicate with each other without having phones and all this stuff. But when I got into general population, folks had heard about me in general population and heard about me being sort of the prayer person, and they started calling me the preacher man, which is a name that my grandparents had given me when I was much younger.
Uh-huh.
So I thought that was quite prophetic.
I tell you, oh my goodness. So were you no longer in danger at this point, would you say?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, that like I said, folks in jail have a very interesting way of being able to communicate with others that are in there. So once I was placed into general population, some of the guys there had already sort of heard of me. I presumably from some of the guys that were, in the room with me. And so, I definitely still had, some fear, the residue of fear of what may happen to me while I'm in general population. I certainly did not feel safe behind bars because the guards who were really tasked with keeping people safe and being equitable and just while in there, treat people as if, you should be discarded or automatically have this assumption that you're guilty. So, whatever punishment or whatever come to you should be your punishment. And so I did not feel safe. And I was in general population after that. And then there were more people that was actually in my room with me that shared a bunk. When I got there was a little bit more of a sense of community because some of those guys, had been there for a while and they just kind of become accustomed to going through the system. And so they were less tense, I would say. And they were very communicative as well in terms of conversation and talking. And by that time, I had been somewhat oriented into being in the jail system of having been in S unit for so long, 23 and a half hours a day. There was a bit more freedom in general population.
So what did you do to occupy your time? Would you say that you actually made some true, genuine friends while you were behind bars?
No, I didn't necessarily make friends per se, but I, definitely, allowed myself to let folks enter into my story, and I tried to enter into their story from a place of compassion, a place of empathy, and that was therapeutic for me. It was also therapeutic for them to kind of talk through what they were going through, and I had already had some skill sets around counseling and stuff. So I just kind of used it as an opportunity to do, some level of counseling and use my theological, training experience to kind of do some of that while there. But it was challenging, because a lot of those folks kind of felt that they had no way out and that it was inevitable that they were likely to spend time in jail and that they were going to be sentenced. And I just didn't want to get into that mindset.
So you were confident that eventually you would get out?
Yes, I was confident in God's ability to vindicate me.
So how did you get out? What happened?
So I was bonded out. And then once I was bonded out, my parents secured an attorney out of Tampa, Florida, named Guillermo Gomez. And I went into his office and met with him. And at that time, he had already had, most of all the information that he had needed to fight the case. And one of the things I recall asking him is, do you believe, based on what you have in front of you, that I'm an innocent man? He says, I absolutely have nothing in front of me, to be honest with you. He said, this was a very sloppy investigation. This shouldn't have never happened. He says, I believe that you're an innocent man. And I said, well, if you believe that I'm innocent, would you promise me that you'll fight for my life as if it was your own? And when he told me, yes, he would, that was confirmation enough for me to have confidence in his ability to fight my case very zealously as if his life depended on it.
I can't help but wonder what you were like once you got out after those 9 months, horrific 9 months in jail. Would you say that you were a different person?
Yes, I would. It's so difficult to explain. But for those folks who knew me prior to that experience, knew me to be a very vivacious, joyful, innocent kind of person, someone who trusted very easily, kind of went about the world with no care. very transparent, um, very kind. I still think I have, tenets of those things, but much more guarded, much more
Mhm.
protected, a bit more skeptical. Um, and so those things do
Mm.
change you when you have these kind of experiences.
What steps were taken, or how did you eventually get vindicated and exonerated?
So I recall going to court several times within that span of time. And the judge that was on the case, the first thing he had said to me when I got up there, he says, the state of Florida against, Herron Gaston. He shared with me what the charges were and said, do you understand that these are very serious charges? And I said, yes, Your Honor. And he
Mhm.
said that, for each count, carries 30 years. And he says that you are facing 120 years in the Florida State prison if you are convicted of these charges. Do you understand? And I said, yes, Your Honor. And then I also proceeded to say to the judge, and probably against my counsel's wishes because he didn't want me to say much, but just yes. I said, I heard you, Judge, talk about the seriousness of the crime. You also indicated to me that, since you've been on the bench since 1990s, you've never dismissed a case of this kind. And I want you to know that you're looking at an innocent man. And I said, and I hope that you could see this case on the merits, and that you can hear my heart, and that you can see through the evidence that I'm an innocent man. And I would like to return back to society, and hopefully I'll be vindicated, and that you'll take back your words, and that this will be your first case that you dismiss. And he looked at me like very angrily, like, how dare you say that? I'm the judge here. And my attorney kind of squeezed my hand as if, don't say anything else. And I didn't. But when we got outside the courtroom, he said, I looked at the judge's reaction. He was kind of turning red as you were speaking, but he was listening. And he says, I've gone before this judge so many times, and he's a no nonsense judge, and he doesn't play, and he's very mean. He says, but I can see some level of compassion that it looked like he has towards the words that you shared. But in the future, please don't say anything outside of yes, Your Honor. But fast forward, what ended up happening is, after I kept going to court back and forth, back and forth, every time I would go, it would be a continuance. They would never have anything, and I'll say, "Well, what's
Mm.
going on?" And the lawyer said, "Oh, they're continuing it. They have more. They want to interview more students. They want to talk to, more people in the program." So they never had their act together. And then
Mm.
this one in October the 5th, 2011, we go to court that morning, and my mom says to me, she says, "Baby, I think today's going to be the day." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "I went to sleep last night," she says, "and I saw a light shining in my bedroom.
Mm.
And I rolled over and I told your dad, I think today's going to be the day. He's not going back over there to court anymore." And so I got up early that morning. I got a shower. I lit some candles. I prayed and I said, God, I'm tired of going back and forth to court. I mean, this is when I was really wanting to just get over it. And
Mm.
I said, God, please bring me out. So we drove to Tampa, about 45 minutes from where we live. And when we got to court that morning, I saw my attorney, and he said, let's go inside. And when we got there, I noticed something different this time. I didn't see the prosecutor have in her hand this gigantic folder that she normally has when she's coming
Mhm.
into court. And I recall the my attorney saying, just hold tight. I think our case is going to be the first case this morning. And so the judge, which is, everybody's in the chamber. There was a lot of folks in the chambers. The courtroom was packed with people. And normally I'm always like the last one to go or closer to the end to go. This time I was the first. So they said, the state of Florida versus Herron Gaston. And, I went up, and my attorney whispered to me and said, I think they're going to dismiss the case today. And like I felt all jittery inside, and all this light bulb turned on, and I'm like, oh my God, yes, it's going to happen. I hope it does. And we got up there, and the Judge Chet Thorne, he said, Mr. Gaston, you said something, during your initial court appearance, and that is something that stuck with me. He says, and I want you to know that today we are deciding to dismiss your case with prejudice, which means that it could never be brought up again in the Florida state system. And I wish to apologize that it took so long, for this case to come to a conclusion. It should have probably never been filed in the first place. I would ask to speak with your attorney as well as the prosecutor in my chambers, and then they went into recess. My attorney stayed back there with him for about 15, 20 minutes. And then he came out and told me, to meet him out in the parking lot. I met him out in the parking lot. We had a conversation and we discussed it. And he said, I'm so happy, that you were vindicated on today. The judge agreed that this case shouldn't have never been filed in the first place. It was a very sloppy investigation. And so, I hope that you would, consider going back to Yale. And if you decide that you don't want to go back to Yale, that you would at least continue on, with your education. And while I was happy about the fact that, the case was dismissed, I was like, now you're just going to send me on my merry way as if an injustice or an injury wasn't caused to me. And that, what about all these, the media outlets who wrote about me? What about the 28 articles that were lingering online that wrote about it, from the Yale Daily News to, MSNBC to the New Haven Register to the Lakeland Ledger to all these different newspaper sites that talked about the story. Yeah. So I'm supposed to just go out there now and just move on with my life and pick up the pieces. Mm-hmm. The damage have already been done, so it was bittersweet because I knew I was happy to have come out of the judicial system in that way, but also now I'm worried about the collateral consequences of what that means for my reputation, my standing in the community, my moving forward, my career, my employment, my relationship. Just, it was a lot.
What happened to the accuser?
So the accuser, because the accuser was 17 years of age, Florida has a law that protects those who are considered to be minors. The student had a lot of trauma and was a part of the DCF system. And, the student reneged on the comments and said they lied. And so essentially the state of Florida protected the student and basically said to me that anytime that I'm giving conversations or talks in reference to it, that the student name should not be discussed for the protection of the young person. Wow. Who is now an adult, probably 28, 29 years old.
Unbelievable. So the young woman who accused you, you have never spoken to her since?
No.
She's never apologized publicly?
No.
Have you forgiven her?
Yes.
Did that take some time?
Yes, but I knew that if I needed to be liberated and if I needed to be set free, then I needed to also be willing to let go. And I've come to the conclusion that you may not get closure in the way that you want to get closure, but you have to get closure for yourself. I can't live my life holding on to the bondage of what that does for me. It's not freeing. It's not liberating. It presses in on me, and it stifles my being able to grow past that. So I've come to accept that I may not ever get an apology. I may not ever see this person a day of my life again. But I know that that God, have used this story in so many ways to help other people. And I've come to understand that sometimes what we go through is not necessarily for us, but it is for you to use that as a testament to help someone else who might be going through something difficult, something arduous. And it might be freeing for someone else and to help save their lives.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too that what was discovered through the investigation, once they finally started to dig, was that she had had a crush on you and she was angry that she didn't get any attention from you.
Right.
And that was
So,
why she came up with this whole fabricated story.
right. And also you never, hurt people hurt other people. And, when you don't deal with your toxicity and you don't deal with your pain and you don't deal with your hurt, oftentimes, even unintentionally, you hurt other people. So that's why I think it's very important, for people to, be in therapy if you need to be in therapy. Because when you don't, you rupture other relationships and it has real consequences for other people's lives. So that's where my empathy, comes in as a minister, as a pastor, as a person of God, that we all, make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes impact other people in ways that we may not or, intended to do.
You showed so much courage when you said, I'm going back to Yale. They're not taking this away from me. I worked too hard to get here. How did that process go?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think that, having received a handwritten letter, while I was incarcerated there in New Haven, from the dean of students who basically was told to do that by the leadership of the institution at the time. And I could tell that he really didn't want to do that because I had a very good relationship with him prior to my being incarcerated. And, literally he was in tears when he brought me the letter and I opened it up and it said that, if in fact, the charges against you are true, then you're not fit for the ministry. And that is something that's seared in my brain because that's the line that I just kept reading 100 times over. And I'm like, why the heck, would you give someone something like this in the middle of a firestorm? And you seem to have already drew a conclusion about my innocence or my guilt just based on the letter that you gave me. And it's so insensitive, for you to bring that kind of letter while somebody is institutionalized. Like, who does that? We're talking about a divinity school here. We're talking about, a professor or dean who is being trained to train other people about having compassion and empathy and not to rush to judgment and no judgments on. And yet you're doing precisely what the world does. And there's a different expectation.
Well, and then once you did get back, you convinced them that, no, I belong here. And you eventually were able to come back to Yale.
Absolutely.
But even once you got there, you talk in your book about how people were looking at giving you the side eye, and a lot of your old friends didn't want to have anything to do with you. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So really, I had to fight, with every fiber in my being to get back in Yale. It wasn't a process that just happened. I mean, I literally had to, take my parents' car, drive it all the way from Florida, show up at the divinity school, and enter inside of the divinity school, sit down, in front of the dean's office, wait to be seen by the dean, basically threaten him and say, I'm coming back because this matter was not an academic matter. This was something totally outside the realm of that. And I left here with good academic standing. And what would be the reason for me having been dismissed? The suspension need to be lifted. The courts decided they were going to lift it and have made a recommendation for me to come back. And the dean was like, oh, it has to follow this process, and we need to talk to the attorney at the school. I can't make that decision, blah, blah, blah. And so eventually, I just basically said that I'm not going anywhere. I understand that classes are going to be starting back in the next couple of days. I am here. I'm not returning back to Florida until I'm enrolled in class. He says, well, what about your financial aid? I said, well, what about it? He says, well, you won't be eligible probably for financial aid because you won't get the same, financial aid package or scholarship package that you got previously. And I said, well, I don't care what it is that you all have to do. I'm coming back to school. And I went and sat down with the financial aid director. I told her that, you all need to find the money. You all have the money. And I said, I'm coming back. I also sat down. He said, well, what about housing? So once I got the financial aid situation straightened out, then he started talking about, well, there's no housing. I said, well, what about the apartment that I was previously in? Well, that apartment's been given up. I said, well, I'm sure that you all have a reserved apartment. I'm going back in the apartment. I have nowhere to live. So then, it was like maybe almost 1 o'clock in the morning where they had, someone from the school to actually open up one of the dormitories for me to be able to go in and stay in. And then I called my parents on the phone and was like, listen, I'm not going to give you all the car back until the next couple of weeks. I'm up in New Haven. I'm at Yale. I'm enrolling back in Yale. And they're like, what the heck are you doing? Why didn't you say this where you were going? You
Oh,
know,
they didn't know you had gotten on the road from
they
Florida
had no
to New
clue.
Haven.
Yeah, they had no clue. But I had it in me. I was just determined that I was going to go back and I was going to do whatever I need to do and twist whatever arm I need to twist to get back, because I learned very early on in life that, I'm my greatest advocate. Nobody can advocate for you like you can advocate for yourself, and nobody can tell your story like you can tell your own story. And so that's what I did. I wasn't looking for the attorney to try to do that for me. I felt like even with my case, I did a lot of the leg work, the foundational work. I was researching statutes and sharing statutes with him, sharing synonymous cases with him, on situations very similar to mine. So I have it in me to fight for myself, and that's precisely what I did in that instance. And I ended up, enrolling back at Yale that week. I had hardly no clothes with me at the time, no toiletries. But I believe that God would make a way somehow. I take one step, God would take the rest. And I went back on campus. It was extremely painful. People were looking at me side-eyed. Folks kept asking me questions, what happened? Why did you do that? It was just very hard. People were staring at me very rudely in class. In fact, some of the students started going to the dean of students office saying that they feel unsafe, with me being back on campus. And these were white students as well as black students with whom, I had built a relationship with prior to leaving there. And this is the way that they also treated me. So I felt a lot of like the self-internalized racial oppression was being projected onto me, even by black students at the time. And it was incredibly painful. And so I just decided to like ignore them, put them on mute, know what the greater assignment was. I had enough pride and confidence in myself to be able to do the work academically. And that's what I did. I went to class and went home, went to class, went home. And then I built new friendships, with students, that were not necessarily at the divinity school, but were outside of the divinity school. And then I just kind of, kept doing my thing and shining. And one of the things I like to say is that eagles are not intimidated by crows. They just simply fly higher. And that's what I did.
I love that. I love that. And you continue to fly high with your 7-degree having self. four books you've authored, right?
Right.
And also, I loved how you turned your pain into purpose. You're also working to eradicate mass incarceration. Can you talk about some of your work?
Yeah. So I've worked a lot with mass incarceration issues. Even prior to going to Yale, I was a gubernatorial fellow for the governor of Florida at the time. His name was Governor Charlie Crist. He was a Republican turned independent turned Democrat. And I was one of the first students to work at the Florida Department of Corrections in the area of reentry. And I would meet, on a daily basis with the leadership of the Department of Corrections. And I was helping returning citizens, get IDs, because you understand the huge impediments that folks have when they're coming out of prison. They can't get a state ID. And if you can't get a state ID, then you can't get a birth certificate. You can't get a birth certificate, then you can't, get, reasonable employment or certain kind of social entitlements. And so I help, to be on the front lines of that in Florida, so that, folks in our state would be able to get IDs and stuff. So I've already been doing work around mass incarceration for a long time. I also was one of the first African Americans to be appointed to the Council on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys, which was an initiative out of the Florida governor's office, helping to curtail the school to prison pipeline that landed, middle school students or high school students into the juvenile justice system, and then they're later graduating to the larger criminal justice system, and then having that sort of footprint follow them for the rest of their lives. So I was already closing in on those things in Florida just as a student. And then when I moved to New Haven, I continued to do the same thing. And then my books, talk a lot about that. And one of my other books entitled Practically Reversing the Trends of Mass Incarceration, I basically give a historical a concept of how the criminal justice system started in the first place, sort of as, slave patrols, and talk about our police departments and the way in which those police departments help to funnel people into the criminal justice system. And then that fuels the privatizations of prisons and all this stuff. And I look at it from a very similar lens as Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow and the Age of Color Blindness. And the criminal justice system, actually serves as a 21st century slave plantation, with African Americans and people of color being behind bars, and then those that are manning these facilities are predominantly white. And so essentially there are more people in our under supervision than people that were enslaved in 1860 behind bars. So this mass incarceration issue is gigantic. I mean, it's literally like peeling an onion. The deeper and deeper you start digging into it, the stinkier and messier and multi-layered it is.
And one last thing I have to ask you. So you are a pastor of a church in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Yes.
And a lot of people would ask the question, well, why did God allow you to go through this? Why you? And I know you asked yourself that question. How would you answer it?
Yeah, that is a question that I had toyed with in my mind for a very long time. In fact, I still ask myself those questions to this day. But I can't help but to think of the scripture that says that, though in Jeremiah 29:11, though I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and plans to not harm you and to give you an unexpected end. I have to think that before the foundations of the earth, that God knew that I would be in that particular position, not because he was trying to drown me or to get my attention, but because he was using it for a greater purpose. And so I think that oftentimes our greatest passion and purpose are birthed out of places of struggle, places of resistance, places of pain. And so I've been able to turn that mourning and pain, into dancing in a somber moment, to really look at it in retrospect and say, I'm glad, God, that you actually used me and trusted me with that kind of testimony so that I might be able to share that with someone else and to bring life to their situation and to let folks know that it's not over, and not to sound cliche until God says so, that there's much more work for you to do here on earth. And all of us have struggles. All of us have pain. All of us endure different levels of hardship. And we're here to be in community with each other and to strengthen each other on this journey called life.
Well, I can't imagine how you impacted some of your cellmates' lives. And, I can't help but think that exponentially other lives, other generations are going to be affected just from those prayers that you prayed for those inmates. So it's amazing how God can use us in our darkest moments. I want everybody to go get this book, The Darkest Night. It is an incredible memoir. And what's next for you, Dr. Gaston? You just got your law degree.
Yes.
In addition to everything else. Oh my gosh. And mind you, I have to say, you are 33 years old. And when we first spoke and I was reading about your degrees and all the things that you had accomplished, I'm like, okay, well, he doesn't look like he's in his late 40s. I'm like, when you told me you were 33, it just blew me away. I mean, wow, you've just accomplished so much.
No, I appreciate that. One of the things, I've always considered going to law school. It's been a goal of mine for a long time. That situation that happened to me was not something that was the first time that I thought about law school. But definitely it deepened the reason why it is that I need to go to law school in the first place. And so when I entered into law school, I came there with a lived experience, and people can take a lot of things away from you. But one of the things people cannot debate you about is your lived experience. They can debate you about politics. They cannot debate you about what has happened to you, and they cannot debate you on how you came out on the other side. I don't just look at the cases and read those cases as just being cases. I attach people to those experiences and to those cases. And so I think it's going to make me a much more compassionate attorney, an advocate. And I know that there's a reason and a purpose for why it is that I wake up every single day with fire in my belly to make sure that I am attacking the criminal justice system in a way that makes it fair, that really pulls out the facts, that allow me to be a representative for people who look like me, who otherwise may not have competent legal representation. And I think that is important that we are involved in the judicial process, because people are making decisions about us without us. And you have to be at the table. And if you're not at the table, you need to build a table. And that's precisely what I'm doing with my law degree. I have not ruled out running for public office. And I think we need to have much more representation at these different tables. I think the time is right that African-American people are beginning to take their rightful place. I do believe in diversity. And if we're not at the table, they're not hearing our perspective. They don't have to include you or think about you. But I think people need to really be involved in what happens at the local level, because that's what really fizzles up to the top, and you can make a real impact in a real community, changing real lives in local government or state government.
Absolutely. Well, you have impacted many, many people and are going to continue to do so, I'm sure. You need to check out Dr. Herron Gaston's TEDx talk on YouTube at Georgetown University. It was incredible. And where can people stay in contact with you on social media?
Yeah, you can stay in contact with me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Keyon 1906, Keyon 1906. You can also find me on Facebook, Keyon, Keyon, Gaston, Gaston. I have a website. Oh, forgot it. Oh, it's the Gaston Justice Coalition group. So you can just type in the Gaston Justice Coalition group, and the website actually will pop up. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Your story is so inspirational, and I just, wow, it's just awesome. And it's been such a great time talking to you. Get the book, The Darkest Night, an incarcerated memoir from jail to Yale by Dr. Herron Gaston. Thank you again.
And thank you so very much for having me, and best of luck to you and your future endeavors and all the wonderful people that you interview. It is so inspirational and inspiring, and I look forward to staying tuned with your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.